The Civil War marked a great turning point in America's history. In the last 3 decades of the 19th century, the country was transformed from a rural republic to an urban state. Frontiers vanished in the face of westward expansion. Factories and steel mills appeared on the scene, fueled by immigrant labor streaming through Ellis Island. Great transcontinental railroad lines linked the country together like never before. With these advances came the evils of poverty and overcrowding. Poor working conditions and labor unrest marred the workplace, and the growing output of factories for the first time threatened the environment. It was in this setting that America came of age, poised on the brink of a revolution, the American Industrial Revolution. In 1870, America was a geographically isolated country. During the last 3 decades of the 19th century, Americans occupied a much larger portion of the country's land than during the 3 previous centuries. The saturation of railways was key to this important geographic change. Prior to 1865, railways did not reach west of the Mississippi River. Although Congress had approved the building of a transcontinental railroad in 1850, the North-South delayed construction with disputes concerning route access. After the Southern states seceded from the Union in 1861, the North gained control of the project, securing a central route. Shortly thereafter, Congress authorized the Central Pacific and the Union Pacific Railroads to build lines meeting each other in Sacramento and Omaha. The Union Pacific workforce included Irish immigrants, Civil War soldiers, and Southern African Americans. From the west, Chinese laborers, the Central Pacific Railway, set out to meet them from California. In May of 1869, the 2 railways met at Promontory Point, Utah, where leaflets and banners invited Americans to ride all the way to San Francisco. When Chief Engineers Samuel Montague and Grenville Dodge shook hands, the moment marked the opening of a way to the west. The economic consequence of the railroads was immeasurable. When engine power moved from wood to coal, the demand for coal tripled. When rails moved beyond iron to steel, the modern steel industry evolved. Many other industries emerged as well. Notably, the refrigerated freight car, developed in partnership with Gustav Swift, gave birth to the meatpacking industry. And the grain, lumber, and steel industries virtually exploded as new railways transported huge resources to towns, cities, and ports across the country. The growth of the railroad was astounding. In 1870, there were 57,000 miles of railroad track in the continental U.S. By 1890, this figure had grown to nearly 167,000 miles. Innovations in the railroad network, such as the air brake and sleeping cars, made rail travel smoother, safer, and more comfortable. But the most dramatic change in the railroads was spurred on by something new. For decades, steel had combined the strength of wrought iron with the durability of cast iron, but the costly process of extracting carbon from iron made it a luxury. Then, in 1859, Kentuckian William Kelly and Englishman Henry Bessemer, working independently, discovered a way to inject air into the molten metal, burning off enough carbon to render steel. Once this process was refined, steel became affordable and easy to produce. The steel race had begun. In 1870, 77,000 tons were produced each year. By 1900, that amount had skyrocketed to 11.4 million tons annually. Andrew Carnegie was the predominant steel baron of his time. Emigrating from Scotland at age 12, he went to work as a bobbin boy at a Pittsburgh textile mill. His wisdom in surrounding himself with highly talented lieutenants to put his competitors out of business. Carnegie once remarked that his epitaph should read, "Here lies the man who was able to surround himself with men far cleverer than himself." Carnegie realized the enormous potential for steel during a trip to Europe in 1872, and soon established a massive factory near Pittsburgh, the most modern of its day. Fed by iron ore from Lake Superior and coal and limestone mined in the east, Pittsburgh soon became the steel capital of the world. Carnegie sold his steel company to banker J.P. Morgan in 1901 for $480 million. He retired with a guaranteed income of $1 million per month. Morgan congratulated him on being the richest man in the world. The company later combined with others to become the United States Steel Corporation, U.S. Steel. Another business that fueled the industrial expansion was oil. When Edwin L. Drake struck oil in Titusville, Pennsylvania in 1859, no one could foresee the impact that it would have on the nation. Initially, it was not of much use. Greasing wagon wheels and nostrums were all it seemed good for, until a Yale professor discovered that it could be refined in 3 important products: gasoline, kerosene, and a distillate used to form new substances. From 1860 to 1900, dozens of developers applied for patents as motor applications increased with demand. Some industrialists were wildly successful in exploiting this new market. Among them was a young man named John D. Rockefeller. Born to a New York peddler in 1839, Rockefeller went on to become the first oil billionaire. At age 16, John D. Rockefeller began working as a clerk in a produce company. While there, he formed a partnership in a grain commission. Rockefeller used those profits to enter into the oil business at 23 years of age. Rockefeller set out to make the fledgling oil industry efficient. His goal was to establish a centralized control system to curtail wild price variations and waste. 15 years later, the goal was reached when his Standard Oil Company of Ohio controlled the flow of oil products from producer to consumer. Rockefeller's companies had acquired crude oil fields, long-distance pipelines, and operated retail outlets. By 1880, Standard Oil owned the chief refineries in New York City, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Cleveland. Ultimately, Rockefeller controlled 90% of the world's oil trade under the Standard Oil Trust, which comprised 41 companies. The trust was dissolved in 1892 by the Supreme Court for antitrust violations. Although railroads, steel, and oil were among the most influential industries of the late 19th century, they were not alone in their prosperity. Prior to the Civil War, the U.S. Patent Office issued less than 1,000 patents annually. By 1890, inventions were being registered at the rate of 25,000 each year. The invention of the typewriter, the adding machine, and the cash register sped the growth of business. George Eastman's Brownie camera, the elevator, and Alexander Graham Bell's telephone all mark this new season of ingenuity. By 1900, Bell's phone had found its way into 1 million homes. But supreme among all inventors was Thomas Alva Edison. Among his many inventions, Edison was responsible for the phonograph, the mimeograph, the dictaphone, improved film projectors, storage batteries, and, of course, the light bulb. Thomas Edison didn't actually invent the light bulb, but he refined the filament, making it practical for everyday use. Along with his team of scientists, Edison is credited with producing a minor invention every 10 days and a major invention every 6 months. During his lifetime, Edison was granted an astonishing 1,093 patents. Despite advances in industry, Agriculture remained America's basic occupation. Like the revolution in industry, the switch from hand labor to mechanized labor marked the revolution in agriculture. By 1870, the reaper, thresher, steel plow, and combine had encouraged farming in the rugged prairies west of the Mississippi. To feed the growing population, settlers pushed west to cultivate new lands, due in part to the Homestead Act of 1862. The Homestead Act promoted the settlement of publicly owned lands in the Great Plains in either of two ways. For a $10 fee, land was given in 160-acre parcels to anyone who would live on or farm the land for 5 years. Or settlers could buy the land outright for $1.25 per acre. By 1870, migrants flowed west from Kentucky, Missouri, and Illinois at the rate of over 5,000 wagons per month. But crop yields were low to the 500,000 families who claimed homestead land due to light rainfall and arid conditions. In response to this hardship, a new method called dry farming was developed, which required that the fields be left fallow every other year. This allowed the dry soil to store up moisture and nutrients for the following year's crop. These frontier farmers discovered that wheat was an ideal crop for dry farming, and by 1900, the plains had become one of the greatest wheat-producing regions in the world. But farmers faced many hardships. For pioneer farmers, neighbors were few, water scarce, and families faced brutal winter blizzards and intense summer heat. The dreaded summer dust storm might erase a season's labor, and swarms of locusts could wipe out entire crops. In some treeless plains areas, families lived in houses made of sod or Nebraska marble to insulate themselves against the extreme changes in temperature. Between 1860 and 1890, the nation's population more than doubled. The American farmer rose to the challenge, growing enough grain, cotton, and corn, and raising enough beef and pork to not only supply the growing population, but to create a surplus as well. By 1890, the first successful gasoline-powered tractors were in use, enabling farmers to meet urban demand. Each successful farm produced enough food to feed 5 people in 1850. 40 years later, those same farms could feed 15 people, largely through the use of more sophisticated and modern equipment. Along with these conveniences came problems unique to modern development. By 1890, overproduction had begun to occur, leading to a glut of produce on the world market. Inevitably, prices plummeted. With increasing demand, shipping rates were steadily rising, and by 1877, it took fully half of gross sales to pay the exorbitant freight charges. Overwhelmed by this predicament, 80% of homestead farms failed by 1900. Most never completed their 5-year residency requirement. While farming drew people to the prairies and plains, mining beckoned them even further west. By horseback or rail, prospectors converged on the mountain countryside, seeking their fortunes in silver and gold. Overnight, makeshift homes and tents would spring up along hillsides in the great wilderness. These settlements were the forerunners of cities such as Boise, Idaho, and Denver, Colorado. It was a rough and dangerous existence. Bandits roamed the roads, seeking precious metal at the owner's expense. Vigilante law was established in many western towns where the rope and gun ruled. While mining made some rich, most prospectors managed only a meager living from the rapidly disappearing pockets of precious minerals. Nearly 4 million longhorn steer roamed the Texas plains in 1860. As demand for beef grew in faraway cities such as Chicago, St. Louis, and Philadelphia, the challenge was created to move large herds toward the cities. In 1867, Joseph G. McCoy built a cattle trading station in Kansas near the railroad. McCoy recruited cowboys to drive herds. and within 5 months, 25,000 Longhorn had arrived. Several other cattle trails snaked their way to Kansas in a remarkably short time. Farmland along these trails was often trampled by the steer, and the homesteaders reacted bitterly to the haphazard destruction of their cultivated lands. As railways began to crisscross the country in the 1880s, the demand fell for cowboys to relocate Texas herds. By the 1890s, the peak of the cowboy era had come to an end. The American Industrial Revolution was marked not only by the changing face of American industry, but also by the changing face of America. As mills and factories sprouted across the land, cities woke up around them. In turn, the cities beckoned to workers by the millions from the American countryside and from overseas to fuel the burgeoning industrialization. What was once a rural nation was rapidly becoming an urban state. Between 1860 and 1910, the urban population grew from 6 million to over 44 million. Rural Americans abandoned their farms to take factory jobs in the big cities. Joining them en masse were new immigrants from overseas. By 1870, they were arriving on American shores at a rate of nearly 400,000 per year. By 1882, this number had doubled to 800,000 annually. This tide of urban migration brought with it new social problems. Until 1885, most immigrants were from Northern Europe and Britain. But by the late 1880s, people from Southern and Eastern Europe and Latin America began to disembark from the transcontinental steamships, creating racial and ethnic tensions. Due to increased cultural diversity, the scope of social problems began to grow. These were the landless, the unskilled, and poverty-stricken. The huddled masses that Emma Lazarus reflected upon in her poignant inscription for the Statue of Liberty.
Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door.
The growth of American urban centers was nothing short of astounding. In the 20 years after 1870, the population of Minneapolis grew from 13,000 to 165,000. Denver grew from 4,700 to 107,000. And New York had a population of over 2 million. Chicago and Philadelphia had more than 1 million citizens each, and Baltimore, Boston, and St. Louis were home to nearly 500,000 people. Housing, water, and crucial services such as sanitation, roads, and bridges were woefully inadequate. New tenements sprung up and were immediately overcrowded. Garbage collection efforts and police and fire protection simply could not meet the overwhelming demand of city dwellers. Journalist H.L. Mencken described the stench of 1880s Baltimore like a billion polecats. Widespread corruption in the cities was blamed on the immigrants who crowded dilapidated buildings, packed the jails, and voted for the candidates of powerful politicians in return for small favors. In 1900, a local journalist marveled at the capacity people displayed to survive in deplorable conditions. The wonder is that they are not all corrupted, and speedily, by their surroundings. 19th century sociologist William Graham Sumner held the controversial belief that the fittest members adapt to the environment and prosper, while weaker members do not. For the social Darwinist, these principles of natural selection applied to capitalism. The more prevalent view, championed by the wealthy, including John D. Rockefeller, was that the power to make money is a gift from God. Modern America rose from the foundations laid by men such as Rockefeller, and history views them kindly for their contributions. But despite their wealth, they were often reluctant to share the good fortune with their employees. Employees often worked 12 to 18-hour days. Factories were dark, dirty, and dangerous. Working conditions in many factories were shocking. One Massachusetts textile worker compared the animosity between worker and employer to the former feeling of bitterness between the North and the South. While business tycoons risked huge amounts of money to gamble on technological advances in new markets, they were unwilling to share profits with their workers. Their words reflect the expectations of one Massachusetts employer. "I regard my work people just as I regard my machines. When my machines get old and useless, I replace them. It's the same with these people. As long as they do the work for what I choose to pay, I get out of them what I can." Many factory machines were run by women and children, some as young as 8 years old. These children, who were paid less than adults, were forced to work the same long hours. This was a typical factory workday for children in the textile factories around 1870. Many families depended on the small incomes of their young children to survive in America. These are the words of Sadie Frown, a 16-year-old sweatshop girl.
"Those machines run like mad all day long. Sometimes my finger gets caught, and the needle goes through it. If it goes through the nail, too, it hurts real bad. But I just tie a rag around it and keep on sewing. Sometimes the finger has to come off. Y'all have accidents like that."
If workers complained, they were quickly replaced with other immigrants eager for the work. These conditions planted the seeds for labor reform. The skilled workers, cigar makers, printers, and iron workers began to organize in 1875. Soon after, factory workers also began to unite. They sought to get equal pay for women and shorter workdays. By the end of the decade, union membership reached 300,000. In 1877, pay cuts totaling 20% caused Baltimore and Ohio rail workers to strike. 2/3 of the nation's rail service was affected. 10 workers in Baltimore were killed in the resulting riots. Another 26 in Pittsburgh died, prompting President Rutherford B. Hayes to call out federal troops, thus ending the strike. These events led to the formation of the Knights of Labor in the 1880s, led by Terence Powderly. This organization worked to improve adverse sweatshop and factory conditions and to outlaw child labor. The Knights were at odds with the more conservative American Federation of Labor, a movement headed by Samuel Gompers. Gompers emerged as leader of labor reform, leading the AFL from 1886 until his death in 1924. By 1900, laws were being passed to improve housing conditions, health, and education for the poor. Before the mid-19th century, America had a seemingly endless supply of natural resources, including timber, minerals, and wildlife. Throughout much of the country's history, pollution was not a major problem. But the Industrial Revolution upset the balance between man and nature. For decades, waste from factories was dumped haphazardly into lakes, rivers, and streams. Pollution from the mainstream use of factory machinery and motor-driven vehicles had an adverse impact on the atmosphere. In 1870, the devastating consequence to natural and animal resources spurred the formation of wildlife organizations dedicated to reversing this dangerous trend. Wide-scale, careless environmental pollution became an issue vigorously debated in political circles. By 1880, modern conservationists who had become organized to champion the movement lobbied congressmen and state legislators. In response, by 1890, Congress had set aside millions of acres of land across the U.S. to preserve resources. Huge expanses of terrain were set aside as national parks and habitats. Prior to the end of his term, President Grover Cleveland created new forest reserves totaling 20 million acres in 1897. In 1888, the Boone and Crockett Club, a sportsmen's conservation organization, was formed by Theodore Roosevelt. In 1891, the Forest Reserve Act gave the president the authority to set aside public lands marked by forests. 27 men founded the Sierra Club in 1892, with John Muir as its president. Water pollution was addressed in 1899 when the River and Harbors Act prohibited the dumping of waste in the nation's harbors, canals, and waterways. The turn of the century symbolized the end of the old America. The former rural country, grounded in agriculture and hand-worked goods, had become an urbanized industrial Goliath. The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad had at long last fulfilled the march of manifest destiny. New industry set the stage for future growth, and the new Colossus had seen a native population become a land of immigrants. Revolutionary changes achieved at a revolutionary pace. As the 19th century faded, the nation, having survived its struggle for independence, the ravages of a civil war, and the impact of an era, stood poised on the brink of a new century. Much remained to be done, but the foundation had been laid. America was now strong enough to face the unique challenges the 20th century would bring.